Yeah, well, I'm back again talking to Kev Mac. I like to talk about a few things dealing with Slauson and dealing with my man-child.
All right, let's focus in on the assassins. Give me the background on assassins and how that came about.
Well, dating back, I think it was about 1962, first part of 1963, you had a lot of Slausons that at that particular time were at the age of 20, 21, and 22, and most of them had began to be hustlers. And there was a pool hall on 78th and Central called Jones Pool Hall across the street from the Savoy skating rink. And that's where a lot of the original Lil Slauson and Baby Slausons hung out. Also, we had a dog stand on 74th and Broadway called a dog stand, Slauson Dog Stand. So these are where the places that they hung out. Around Fremont, you had younger Slausons, and basically they called themselves Slausons, but they didn't have a particular clique, and it was thousands of them. I would estimate that the assassins came up to, at one time, to about 500, 250, somewhere around in there, numbers. And this was 1963 when I started the Slauson Assassins at Fremont.
Did you have to go through anybody to get the approval to start a clique? And where was the recruiting pool coming from?
Well, because at that particular time I was running with older Slausons, I had a little bit of understanding of, I was like older than most of the dudes as far as experience is concerned. That was going to Fremont at that time, or they was coming out of junior high school from Edison or Audubon, one of the junior high schools on the east side that was coming to Fremont. So I did have a reputation at that particular time. Me and Bird used to be together a lot. And I told Bird, and I came to Bird, I said, man, we have so many Slausons here around Fremont going to Fremont. And this was approximately in 1963. I said, man, I'm going to start a clique. And I'm going to name them the Assassins. And our job is going to be to implement fear in all of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is what we called it. So no neighborhood would have any type of consideration of coming up against us. And that's when I started the Slauson Assassins.
Tell me about the ranking, like presidents and secretaries and all that. Was that included in the social?
Yeah, it was formed basically like a club. We had a treasurer, a secretary, we had a vice president and a president. I was basically over all of them because I was the one that started it. So I never had the title of president. I never had no title except Lafayette, the high priest of the Slauson Assassins.
What were your active years?
Well, I was an assassin. When I started the Assassins was the last part of 1963. And I continued to be a shot calling the Assassins until 1965 when me and Kumasi began to start hustling. And we discontinued a major participation in gang fighting.
What type of hustles did they have back then?
Well, you had marijuana dealers, you had robbers, you had just about the same as you do today back then. But back then it was more quiet. It was more kind of like underground type of activity. But I went off into dealing, robbing, things of that nature in 1965. Approximately a month or so before the rebellion, the 65 rebellion.
What high schools were the assassins concentrated in?
Concentrated at Fremont. You had very few assassins that went to Washington or Manual Arts.
Did they encounter problems when they went to other high schools?
Well, I did when I was, that's one of the reasons why I started the Assassins and one of the reasons why I started packing a gun. Because at that particular time, a lot of people that went to different schools and they were outnumbered tremendously, they were rat-packed. So I started carrying a gun at school. And for years, that's what I did. I was known to be carrying a gun all the time.
Did you ever catch a case for carrying a gun to school?
Yeah, 1962 at Manual Arts. They found a 22 in my locker. Uh, I was lucky that my locker was open and my fingerprints wasn't on the gun and the charges had to be dropped. I was a juvenile then, and my father had Brody, who eventually became a judge, but he was a high-class black lawyer at that particular time, and he had them to drop the charges because they had no fingerprints on the gun, and my locker was open, so anybody could have put it in there.
Who were some of your main rivals back then?
Well, besides Watts, I guess the Gladiators. We had a few incidents with Gladiators, a few incidents with the Businessmen. Not many. I had conflict with rebel rousers and bartenders because I also went to Manual and I also went to Darcy. So I had incidences where I felt as though I was disrespected and returned to straighten things out.
Can you give us an idea of where the rebel rousers were located?
Well, the rebel rousers was like in the vicinity of Dodge City West, and Dodge City was approximately, say, between around Normandy, Western, between, say, Jefferson, Exposition, uh, in that area.
How about the vineyards?
Vineyards was further west. Vineyards was like around Darcy High School. On the street called Vineyard, you had a Vineyard Park. The bartenders was concentrated in the same area, about the same area.
Did you guys ever have any encounters with Aliso Village?
Liso, to my knowledge, no, not to my knowledge.
You were aware of the Purple Hearts?
Yeah, the Purple Hearts was way back, going way back. Yeah.
Before your time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember the Purple Hearts, Yellow Jackets. Yeah, that's going back into the late 40s. Yeah.
You know, a lot of people want to know more about Bunchy Carter. Is there anything that you think we might have left out that might be significant that people want to know about?
Well, Bunchy, to me, was an inspiration. When I basically became close to Bunchy, I was incarcerated for bank robbery, and he was writing me. When he was in the Renegades, I had seen Bunchy, had talked to Bunchy, had been around Bunchy, but we were not close.
Could you give me an estimate on how many members of Slauson actually joined the Panthers?
Well, during the time that the Slausons and Bunchy created the chapter of the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles, I wouldn't say that it was a large amount of Slausons, but the Slauson influence was at the beginning of the party at that particular time. A lot of activity that went on was basically promoted by the few that was up under Bunchy that were Slausons, but not a large amount of Slausons. No, not a large amount of Slausons were Black Panthers. No, not in L.A., no.
Where did Bunchy live at?
Bunchy stayed in the 80s. His mother, I think, is still staying in the same place now. I'm not sure. I think it's 83rd. I'm not sure.
And were you familiar with his brother?
Yeah, Kenny?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kenny. At the time that I got busted for bank robbery, Kenny was very, very young. Later on, when the murder beef happened, and Kenny was in the county jail, I was in the county jail at that particular time on my way to the penitentiary, and Kenny had the murder beef and was on his way to the penitentiary, but he was much younger than me.
Kenny wasn't part of the Slausons, or was he?
He was much younger. I think Kenny, you're talking about Kenny Carter.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I think Kenny professed to be Crip.
Oh.
I think Kenny hung around in the Avalons, over in the Avalon Park, I think, around in there. See, but he was much younger than I was. And at the time that Kenny was coming up, just like the Munsons was coming up, was I was in the underworld and I had went to the federal pen and I was, had other activities. Mm-hmm. So I seen the Munsons in San Quentin in 1974 and stuff, but my stay in San Quentin was short because they had 3 blacks were killed in the latter part of 1974, and I was shipped to Folsom.
But when did the gunplay come into effect?
Well, going back into the late 50s and the early 60s, you did have some gunplay that went on in Los Angeles with gangs, but basically it escalated around in 1963. At that particular time, I had committed a burglary in a pawn shop and had obtained quite a few small 32s and 22s. So when I started the Assassins, I issued out approximately about 30 guns to different members of the Slausons, Assassins, and that's when the gunplay began to escalate all over the city of Los Angeles. We got a hell of a reputation at that particular time to be what they called packing back then, and had guns and stuff. To my knowledge, during the period of 1960 up until when I stopped gang activity, 65, I don't think it was over 10 killings, compared to maybe 5 or 6 a week now, back then. It was a lot of, hand-to-hand combat. You had other weapons, such as, tires and bumper jacks and baseball bats and knives and blackjacks, but the gunplay began to escalate after the rebellion in 1965 to a major degree. And at that time, I wasn't participating in gang activity anymore.
What was the common type of gun on the streets back then?
22s, sawed-off shotguns, no automatic weapons as far as, they didn't have them. You know what I'm saying, AKs and all that. Yeah, they didn't have them at that time.
What about 38s?
Well, you had 38s, 32s, 22s. Most of them were revolvers. But you didn't have a lot of gunplay. You did not have a lot of gunplay. You'd be surprised the difference between the years of 1965 and say 70, how gunplay escalated, and especially after 70, after Crips and Bloods, and after Bunchy was assassinated, it began to escalate more and more. When I got out in 1971, gunplay was the average thing for gang activity in Los Angeles.
Oh, deep.
The Vikings were the youngest as far as the Gladiators is concerned. You had the rebel rousers, you had the bartenders, you had Vineyard, you had Blood Alley,
What was going on in Blood Alley back then?
Well, Doc, I know you heard of Doc Holliday.
Yes.
Yeah, Doc was from Blood Alley. Yeah, he was from Blood Alley.
Well, I don't hear much about any violence in Blood Alley, but I ran across some old newspaper articles. There was a lot of crime over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Blood Alley wasn't that large, Doc, I think Doc is approximately 70, maybe 74, 75 now. But at that particular time, going back to the early 60s and things, you didn't hear much about Blood Alley, but there was a neighborhood called Blood Alley on the west side. They were basically a little north of the rebel rousers, because you had Dodge City, you had the rebel rousers, and you had Blood Alley, and they were much closer than you had between Gladiators and Slausons. Businessman was pretty close to Slauson. So you have to understand that Slauson covers such a large area. Now you have gangs every 3 or 4 blocks. But we were spaced in such a large area, such as all the way from the freeway all the way over to Alameda, and from Manchester all the way down to Slauson, or for Avalon Gardens all the way down to Slauson, that we were larger than the average neighborhood.